patient was shifted to our hospital after being treated in multiple hospitals. Aged around 55 to 60, this man was very thin and weak. In medical terms we term this condition as bone and skin, where the patient has an inadequate percentage of water in his body. There was a girl by his side, aged around 20 to 25, who called herself the old man's wife. My junior doctors told me about this patient's condition and how he had had chronic diarrhea for the past 4 months. He couldn't eat anything. The doctors had conducted all the tests they possibly could, including gastroscopy, endoscopy and biopsy etc., and every single one of them was inconclusive. His condition worsened day by day as no medication seemed to be treating his condition. He was then shifted to ventilation in the ICU. One of his previous doctors sarcastically commented, "Why don't you make him listen Surah Rahman? Because nothing is obvious with the test reports what's been really happening to him since past 4 months." The junior doctors took the old man's medical history and told me that he didn't have diabetes or any similar disease. So I told them to get him tested for AIDS. The doctors told me that last year he had a very similar condition of diarrhea when he got tested for AIDS in Mayo Hospital. The test came out to be negative and he got better in the next 3 to 4 months. This year, however, his condition was way worse. He was lying unconscious on the ventilator. I still insisted to get him tested for AIDS. The doctors in our hospital make sure that the recitation of the Quran, mainly Surah Rahman, keeps on playing by the patient's beds at least once a day. On the 3rd day in our hospital, one of the junior doctors called me up and said that he has noticed that every time we play the recitation of Surah Rahman, we see numerous maggots emerging from his oral and nasal cavities. The pipes that were inserted in his nose for breathing, and one in the mouth directed to the stomach, were all filled with many tiny maggots, which you can see in the video. A machine called sucker is normally used to extract any phlegm, mucus, accumulated in the patient's throat via negative pressure. However, the doctors couldn't explain where these maggots were coming from. They checked the stomach as well as the nasal cavity, lungs, but everything was clear. The nurses said that these maggots stopped emerging as soon as we paused the recitation of Surah Rahman. There are several cavities in our bones known as sinus, so I suggested that these maggots might be coming from there. We've seen patients in the last stages of diabetes where their wounds become so infected, we noticed the appearance of such maggots. But this man's condition was very unusual as he didn't even have diabetes. I told the doctors to get his AIDS results back while we treat him with other antibiotics. I suggested that the patient's immune system might be suppressed, which would explain the appearance of these maggots. The patient had no family member visiting him, and the girl, his wife, did not bring any medicines, so we started his treatment by the hospital's funds. The emergence of maggots from his nose, mouth, and now even his eyes continued as soon as we started the recitation of Surah Rahman, after which the doctors and even his wife told us to stop playing it. One of the Christian nurses told them that she didn't know what was wrong with the patient, but what she did know was that every time we played this prayer, these maggots started leaving the patient's body. She believed that if we keep on playing the prayer, the patient would start healing faster. I told the doctors to tell the wife to either get the patient's test results herself or to give us the receipt so that we could get them. One of the nurses had counseled the patient's wife, telling her that her husband might have AIDS, which might be affecting the immune response in his body and causing the emergence of maggots. The wife got scared and told the nurses that she wanted to talk to the doctor in charge. It has been over a year since this incident occurred, and after a lot of thought I've decided to narrate this incident to other people. At that time, she told me a very horrific story. She was afraid that if her husband tested positive for AIDS, she was very likely to have contracted it from him. She came to my room and told me in person that her husband is a magician. I asked her why she had lied about her husband being a taxi driver then. So she said that he does drive a taxi, but he also practices black magic using the Quran. I laughed because I knew it wasn't possible to do magic via Quran. Junior doctors were also sending me the messages about maggots, that what do we need to do with them. I still have the video of the maggots that we extracted from the patient's mouth and nose. That woman told me that she used to be married to someone else and she was really annoyed by her mother-in-law when one of her friends told her about this magician and how he could solve her problem. I don't want to go into further details, but she told me that the man's work was exceptional. It almost never failed to work. He used to first take the person into a room with bolsters and voodoo dolls. He then used to listen to their problems and used to make them recite the Quran. Young guys and girls desperate to get married or to get an offspring often used to come to him with their problems. The worst thing that he used to make them do was that he used to tell them prostrate before a bolster, claiming that someone had already done black magic on them, and this ritual was very important to break that. The wife said that at that time she had little knowledge of Islam and its virtues and sins in particular, which made her fall into the man's trap by committing this hideous act. After that, he used to tell them to perform ablution, and used to recite multiple verses from different chapters from the Quran and mixing them up. After 1 to 2 sessions, he didn't used to charge anything. But people who used to be really desperate used to still come to him after that, which is when they were told about the money and risk involved. But he used to assure them that their work would be done. He used to force young guys and girls to fornicate with him and then eat his waist. After that he used to give them verses in Arabic and used to tell them to recite them before mixing something in their husband/wife's food. The woman did as he had told her to. Now such a woman who has committed adultery, her marriage is not only invalidated but also, this transgression has forced her out of the bounds of Islam. After this, she said, she saw little change in her husband. Instead, he started beating her up. But what did change was that I started getting tempted to come to this man every day. She was then tempted to get a divorce and get married to this man. She ran from there without telling them and lived with this man for 6 months, after which she got involved in his work. The man did our nikah by the Quran and said that our willingness to marry is enough for this nikah to be valid, even though she still hadn't gotten a divorce from her previous husband. Few months later, the man got chronic diarrhea and he was admitted to Mayo Hospital, Lahore. After 4 months of suffering, he realized that what he was doing was wrong and asked God for forgiveness. He told his wife that from then onwards he will leave all this work behind and will only focus on driving his taxi. He asked his so-called wife if she could survive with him with that income. He told her that their nikah was invalid and that she should go back to her ex-husband and ask him for a divorce and ask God for forgiveness. She did as he told her to and went back to her ex-husband, who got furious after seeing her. He beat her up and told her that he had already divorced her and did not want to see her anymore. When she came back to the man 2 days later, the doctors of Mayo Hospital were amazed to see his condition. Docs gave him some medicines and his condition got a lot more better, and thus he was discharged. After that, they went to a masjid and did their nikah. The man continued to drive his taxi. For 6 months, he worked hard driving his taxi and earned enough to get the daily bread. They were leading a very peaceful life. He left that magic world, but the world is so cruel. He was again emotionally got blackmailed into it. A very beautiful girl came crying to my husband and told him her problem, and the man started his past work once again without thinking twice. She kept telling him, but he was blinded by all the money he was getting, and now, 4 months later, he has the same condition, worse than before, and he's lying unconscious in this hospital. The woman said that she wants to ask God for forgiveness and wanted no part in whatever her husband was doing. She asked me about the appearance of maggots, and I explained her without going into much detail that they might have been emerging from his sinus due to lack of blood and other germs infecting his body. After narrating this incident, she took out the reports for HIV that she had obtained from the lab. She told me that she was scared that she might have contracted it too. She asked if she should listen to Surah Rahman, and I told her why not. The man stayed alive for 1 more day, and every time we played the recitation of Surah Rahman, we saw maggots simmering out from his mouth and nose. This didn't stop. In the end, his own wife wasn't ready to take his dead body. We told her that he wasn't the hospital's responsibility. A Muslim is not allowed to practice black magic. If he or she does learn to do it somehow, then he isn't a Muslim anymore. People misuse the Quran intentionally or unintentionally, sometimes by using it while not being pure. Allah says in the Quran that there is blessing and recovery in the Quran for the believers and loss for the tyrants.